All right, we will get started. So welcome everybody to the Public Information Center for the Proposed Levels of Service Study in the town of Saugeen Shores. The town is in the beginning of a study with Hempson's Consulting Limited to determine the ideal level of service for our community when it comes to maintaining, repairing, and replacing municipal assets. This includes infrastructures such as roads, bridges, underground water and wastewater services, facilities, as well as some of our vehicles and equipment. Your feedback will help us with proactive planning and making informed decisions to meet the needs of the community, all while planning for the future. Please note that attendees cannot be seen or heard during this session. You can raise your hand in Zoom to indicate that you wish to contribute a point or ask a question by clicking the raise hand icon. The host will then see that you have your hand raised and can invite you to speak. During the question period, the attendees who have clicked the raise hand icon will be granted permission to be heard during the live webinar to provide their questions and or comments. To lower your hand, click on the same button again. This session is being recorded and posted live to the Town of Saugeen Shores YouTube channel, and this session is scheduled to run until 7 p.m. At this time, I would like to introduce the team here today. To start, my name is Jessica Rogers. I'm the Asset Management Supervisor with the town and the project lead for this. With me today, I also have Laritha Fletcher, our GIS coordinator, and Rahul Amin, our Manager of Engineering Services. From Hempson, we have Andrew Marabella and Christopher Ballette. And at this time, I'd like to hand it over to the Hempson team to provide a brief presentation and then open the floor for questions. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Jessica. Good evening, everyone. My name again is Andrew Marbella. With me again is Christopher Ballette. I'll do just an introductory overview here. So we were retained by the town to undertake the asset management plan and specifically help develop with the proposed level of service requirements. This is a requirement under provincial legislation in order to develop these proposed level of services by July 1st of 2025. We're a small firm. We're based out of Toronto. We've been around for about 40 years now. We do a lot of asset management work in the province, not only on asset management work, we do municipal finance work, development charges, utility rate studies, long-range financial planning, and then we also have a demographic side of our firm, which we do planning forecasts, demographic analysis, land use planning. So diverse in that sense. We work with a range of municipalities across the province, from the city of Toronto to the largest in Brampton, Vaughan, down to some of the smaller communities out in the province with a few hundred people, upwards to municipal sizes like Saugeen Shores. So definitely a diverse range. And then outside of the province of Ontario, we do also work outside, extend out west to the city of Vancouver and out east in kind of Moncton and St. John and such. So it's a bit of a background of our firm itself. Today, we're going to be specifically focusing on the discussion related to asset management and our participation in that. And again, largely to hear your views, get some input and some feedback as we kind of move forward through this process. Just in terms of our topics for discussion today, just trying to go to the next slide here. We'll go through kind of a bit of a brief overview of what is asset management, the definition and the overview. We'll talk a little bit about the regulatory requirement and the legislation that we're working within. We'll go through a bit of an overview of the town's 2024 asset management plan, which was completed to fulfill some of the earlier requirements of that legislation. It's been kind of a work in progress since 2019 for municipalities to kind of hit those boxes, with the last checkbox being for the July 1st, 2025 deadline. And then we'll get into a little bit of our approach into determining proposed level of service. And then we'll cap off with just some group discussion and next steps. Just to highlight, today's purpose is when we talk about service levels and asset management, it's really about the service levels and proposed targets related to the management of municipal infrastructure and asset management related activities associated with that municipal infrastructure. So service levels can have a lot of different meanings for different things. And the purpose of really what we're honing in on is the service level component associated with asset management and the delivery of municipal services and infrastructure associated with it. So with that, I will hand it to Christopher, who will go through some of the technicalities, and then we'll open the floor for some discussion.
Sounds good. Thank you, Andrew. So to kind of get started here with kind of the education portion of the session here, what we want to do is kind of leave you a definition of asset management for municipalities, or specifically for municipalities. And one of the key objectives is really the process of asset management is the process of maintaining assets in the most cost-effective way. And really what we're doing here is there's three key objectives. We want to make sure we're maximizing benefits, we're managing risks, and at the same time, we're making sure that our asset service delivery is sustainable over the long term. So when I mean sustainable, I mean from a financial perspective as well as an affordability perspective for residents and businesses in the town. A bit of an overview of asset management here in Ontario. Municipalities are responsible for ensuring that assets are maintained in a sustainable way. Excuse me. And one of the key things is that the town has applied sound asset management principles to date. And what we mean by sound asset management principles, we do think that the town is sort of well ahead of the game of most municipalities or municipalities that are similar size of the town. The town has implemented an infrastructure levy, something that is unique or fairly unique in small municipalities. The town has a 10-year capital plan. 10-year capital plan, the town has looked into the infrastructure needs over the longer term period. A lot of small municipalities are only approaching sort of that state or looking towards getting to that 10-year horizon. The asset management plan is a useful tool for identifying long-term infrastructure requirements and how to plan how to manage those requirements today. So one of the key things in asset management is that we want to look at the sort of the position that we're at today, but we want to look to the future based on that situation that we have today in order to be able to plan over the long term. And one of the key principles, like I mentioned before, is going to be that affordability perspective and making sure that those assets are affordable and we can sustain them over that longer time period. There is, and in Ontario, there is an asset management regulation that governs how the town has to report on the asset management kind of frontier. One of the key things is asset management, OREG 58817. The town is currently working towards kind of the final step of that asset management regulation. And what that means is back in 2019, the town developed a strategic asset management policy. So a set of guiding principles in how the town develops and manages those assets. On July 1st, 2022, the town, and July 1st, 2024, consequently, kind of sort of a requirement that goes sort of hand in hand, just two different time periods. Town develop an asset management plan that includes the existing level of service for the core assets and the existing level of service for the non-core assets. The core assets are the biggest kind of assets in the town's portfolio. They're going to be your roads, water, wastewater, stormwater, bridges, and culverts. So they're really the major sort of infrastructure that you use every day in order to travel around the town, in order to drink water, in order to dispose of water, and so on. Those are the big ticket items that the town manages. The non-core assets are going to be all the other assets beyond those that the town uses in order to manage those assets or in order to provide service. So that's going to be things like your vehicles, your facilities, and some minor assets, things like equipment that the town uses in order to complete and do their work in order to provide service. So those are going to be all the assets that the town owns. And what's been done here is that the current level of service is a set of measures that captures the performance of those assets and how they're providing service to residents and businesses. And that was developed through the 2024 AMP. There's an extensive sort of list of measures that have been included as part of that plan. Going forward, however, and what's being worked on here with the town now is the proposed level of service. And the proposed level of service is required by the regulation to be set over the next 10-year period. So the regulation states, what is the proposed level of service over the next 10-year period based on the current levels of service that have been developed as part of the 2024 asset management plan. And that proposed level of service is really going to be sort of the guiding principle or the guiding measures in order to achieve those service levels and in order to plan for that infrastructure over the longer time period. There are some requirements beyond this timeline that are part of the regulation, sort of not shown here, but after the July 1st, 2025 kind of timeline, the town is required to update its asset management plan every 5 years or do sort of a refresh every 5 years. And there's also a component on annual reporting. The regulation doesn't speak to what that annual reporting needs to be, but it's really related to reporting on progress on implementation of the asset management plan. One of the key really drivers in asset management planning and to kind of put it in simple terms here is really going to be the condition of assets. And the condition of the assets is really what's going to help us determine when those assets need to be addressed or what work needs to be done on those assets. And the condition of assets is one of the sort of key pillars of the level of service discussion. And we'll look at some of those, a sample of those levels of service in a bit. But the level of service is really driven by what you see here. And I'll go through it in a little bit of detail so everyone kind of gets a sense of what we're looking at here. So when we talk about the condition of assets, we think of the assets, are they in good condition? Is a road, drivable? What is the condition of that road? Is the road, does it need to be repaired? Does it need to be replaced? Those are the things that the condition is going to help us determine what work needs to be done. What's shown in the chart here are the conditions for all the assets that the town owns and operates. The bottom of the chart represents the asset categories. So the asset categories, like I mentioned, those services, for example, water, roads, facilities, stormwater infrastructure, parks, bridges and culverts, and so on. The top of the graph there represents the share of the total replacement value of the assets relative to, or the share, or how much of those assets are owned by the town. The total replacement value of the town is just under $860 million. So we're closing in on about $1 billion in infrastructure that the town owns. For a municipality or the size of the municipality, it's quite an extensive asset portfolio. And you can see that, almost approaching $1 billion in assets is representative of typically of towns of this size as well. And that really kind of provides a sense of how vast that infrastructure is and how expensive infrastructure has gotten over the last several years, especially the last couple of years post-pandemic. There's been significant increases in the cost of hard infrastructure, so your water, roads, facilities, and so on. And those costs are being reflected here in that value. So now that said, showing the extent of the infrastructure, the bars here, each of the colors represents the condition or the general condition of that infrastructure in that category. The green is better condition. So anything in green and dark green would be a better condition. Anything in yellow is what we call fair condition, and that represents sort of the mid-range condition of an asset. And then the red and orange will represent assets that are in poor or very poor condition. And what that means is it doesn't necessarily mean that the asset is breaking down or the asset is not usable. What that means is that the asset needs to be monitored a little closer. It may be an older asset, for example. It may want to show here is that the sort of the mid-range of the assets, the yellow, which are sort of at least a larger bar in some of these, that'll be an asset in sort of that mid-range sort of condition. The smaller bars, the orange or the smaller yellow and the reds represent a sort of smaller share of the assets. So kind of going through each one of these, the major infrastructure that the town owns is generally in fairly good condition. So that's your water, wastewater, your roads, your facilities, your storm, your bridges and culverts, and so on. And that's really related to sort of the strict regulatory requirements and as well as the practices of the town. Water and wastewater is a very heavily regulated service. There's a lot of stringent regulatory and safety requirements in the treatment of water and the maintenance of the distribution system and so on. If for the town, the distribution system is generally in good or very good condition. And that good or very good condition is based on the town's inspections of the system. They've done CCTV sort of camera inspections. They monitor those assets on an ongoing basis to make sure that they continue in that sort of condition. The roads is all. Going down through the list and at least from an average perspective and looking at it overall, we would say that the assets are generally in good to very good condition. Going further down to the assets that make up a smaller share of the total $860 million, you can see that there's a little bit more red, and some of those bars, which are supposed to be orange, will show a little bigger of those shares on those assets. The reason for that is generally because some of those assets are what we call rolling stock. They're very short-lived assets, things like your vehicles, things like your equipment, for example, which have shorter useful lives. They're replaced on an ongoing basis. So like I mentioned before, those assets may be showing in the red or orange, but they're still in good working condition. And the town replaces them more so on an ongoing basis in order to make sure that we don't have a big component that's is sort of in the red. Think I see a question? Sorry? Yes, yes. Sorry?
You need the column top. You guys selected read the column of the town.
No. So the conditions that are here are based on data from the town. Yeah. So related are some of your smaller valued assets that are related to the roads, things like your street lights, things like your sidewalks. So not specifically the road itself, but it's related infrastructure. And that's exactly what this session is about, to sort of get that feedback. Yeah. And what I'll say from in terms of that roads column. So the town did undertake a condition assessment, a roads need study a few years ago, or this year. So there's been an update this year, and that information is based on that assessment. So engineers went out, looked at the roads, looked at the condition, assessed them based on sort of their take on the conditions of the roads, and that's what that chart is based on. Yeah, question?
Sorry, I think back to the percentages at the top.
Sure.
Here's what you're saying, is so for instance, is the 30.5% of the value of the 859 million.
That's right.
And then facilities versus parks. Is parks the property and all the facilities on the parks? Or is the park the property of the park and the facilities is what that said?
Sure.
I'll speak to that. So for the asset management plan, the parks is made up of the equipment and facilities on the property itself. As part of our asset management plan, the land, the actual parcel that the parks are on, are covered under our land category because we own them.
Okay, and then from a county perspective,
Mhm.
what are the assets of the county within the municipality?
So the county, they do have a number of roads that run through our municipality, obviously. So those are not included as part of our asset management plan. Any other properties or facilities. So for example, the county owns some of our library buildings and whatnot. So those have been removed from these numbers. So these are only assets that are currently owned by the town.
Done the cameras under the water and sanitary sewer required. So I'm assuming the
Yep.
majority of that is by age.
Yes.
To determine the the quality?
Yes, so some of our assets, our condition is based on age of the asset. This year as well, we did do a CCTV study of our sanitary mains. Now, we only did about a third of the sanitary this year based on budget. Our plan is to continue to do that so that we get a more accurate condition assessment of those assets. Yep. Mhm.
When is that payable and how much is it? Like, when do you get it? Like, how do you get it?
As far as I understand it, that is coming through the budget. So essentially it's allows us to see the funding that we need or to supplement the budget for the various assets. That's more of a budget finance question. Yep.
So when is it due? Like, when do you collect?
It's included, my understanding is it's included in the taxes. Yeah. Yeah.
On your, fleet tax, it's gonna be like a $20 million fleet,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And then about, over 5 million of that change.
Yep.
Now, is that based on the age of the vehicle, or is that based on an assessment of the vehicle?
So it is currently a combination of both. For a lot of our heavy equipment, it is a condition assessment that we receive from the mechanics. We have set out an age criteria for a lot of our fleet. So we say, there's a useful life of all of our fleet. Once we hit the end of our useful life, that's when replacements due. We are currently looking at adding maximum mileage or kilometers to our fleet in order to, once again, make that a better condition rating, as well as get more data from our mechanics.
Oh, maintenance done by your.
Yep, it's on site. It's town. Yes.
The other question is, your landfill and trail gas.
Yes.
They obviously don't include landfill,
No, they do not.
so. What could be
Mhm.
50 million.
Yeah, so for specifically for landfill and trails, as it's noted, there's the condition is unknown or there's no condition data. The reason for that is we're currently going through a study for our landfill, so we're going to get more information with regards to that. And similarly to our trails, we are collecting more data on that information as well right now. So we'll get a better idea of our trail information. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, so again, yeah. So the land value is reflected in the asset management plan under the land category. But however, we don't track the condition of the physical land. So therefore, it's not part of this study, but it is part of our AMP that's posted online.
Any other questions? Okay. Moving on to the next slide here. So in terms of the process for developing the proposed level of service, so there is sort of a 4-step process here overall in terms of the plan. And this particular plan was presented to council a few weeks ago. Sort of the starting point of the process is determine whether those measures to be appropriate. The proposed level of service, the next step is developing those level of service targets. So like I mentioned, The regulation requires the town to develop level of service targets for those measures or the current level of service that have been sort of determined. And what that means is that the proposed level of service is more, like I mentioned, sort of a target. The regulation does not speak to where that proposed level of service should be. The proposed level of service can be higher, lower, or at the current level of service. That's up to the discretion of the town or council to determine that. Now, that said, the general sort of direction that this is going is ensuring that the infrastructure that the town owns and the services that the town provides maintain the current level of service or better, making sure that those conditions that you saw don't deteriorate over time. Like I mentioned, sort of the consultation process, there is a commitment in the strategic asset management policy to make sure that there's consultation with sort of staff, like we mentioned, that work is ongoing. The public, similar to sort of this session here, ensuring that the public has a chance to see this information, ensuring that there's an opportunity for the public to comment on it. And as well as ultimately council. Council is seen as the decision maker, ultimately, obviously by the town, but as well as by the regulation. It's up to council to approve the asset management plan and sort of make a commitment to meet those objectives, not necessarily over the short term, but over the longer time period. As you saw, many of the infrastructure that the town owns is very long-lived, has significantly long useful lives. The implementation of the plan and obviously with the principles of asset management is something that can be done over a longer time period. And that's something that the town is sort of looking at. The final component is identifying the costs to meet those proposed level of service objectives. So we want to make sure the town's budget captures the costs needed to meet those level of service objectives over the next 10 years and over the longer time period. And finally, assessing risks associated to not meeting that proposed level of service. Good asset management practice is that we make sure that we know what the risks are if we don't meet those level of service objectives. So we want to make sure we document what those risks are through the plan. Yep. Oh, yep. Yep. So that's sort of this next slide here. So it's kind of a two-part response here. So the starting point in order to assess the objectives on the level of service side is the town's capital program. So what you see here is a breakdown of the 10-year capital program based on the 2024 budget. And just to be clear, the 2025 budget is currently under deliberation. So some of these numbers might shift a bit as that process goes on. But the starting point is that 2024 budget. The total 10-year 2024 budget is, or 10-year capital program, sorry, is about $376.3 million. And that $376.3 million captures all the infrastructure work needed in order to meet those level of service objectives. That pie includes the cost for all services, both growth and non-growth. And when we say growth, we mean the infrastructure that's needed in order to service new development. So if a new subdivision is going in, we want to build a new road, for example. Sorry, question? Yeah.
Covered by the development charges. That's reviewed every 5 years.
That's right. Yeah, and they are. Yeah. Those portions of the cost, like you mentioned, are funded through development charges. However, there is another portion of cost that's related to the repair, replacement, and ongoing repair and replacement of infrastructure that is funded from other sources, primarily the property tax for your property funded services, tax funded services, and from rates for water and wastewater. So to be clear, the costs presented here are all encompassing in that 10-year capital plan. The costs are the basis or our starting point to your point of this analysis. We want to make sure that in order to meet the proposed levels of service, that $376.3 million is sufficient to meet those objectives. Yes. So through the consultations that we're doing with staff, we want to make sure that the capital program has the sufficient spending to meet those objectives. Yeah. So from our analysis, it's technically both ways. From from our preliminary work, we can say that there are some things that need to be done in order to perhaps go a little above and beyond that. But that said, the 376.3 million is quite a robust capital program. It does cover most, if not everything, that the town needs to do to meet those level of service objectives. Now, I guess back to the point in terms of the sort of the funding side that we were talking about earlier, we are going to be doing a financial analysis in order to determine the sort of the levy, determining what those property tax forecasts are, determining water and wastewater rate revenue forecasts to make sure that those revenues are enough in order to cover the costs in order to meet those proposed level of level of service objectives. To your point, in terms of kind of the other way, on the efficiency side. So the town is already doing some of this, some of the work in the capital program. The town is already undertaking some work in order to look at those efficiencies. As an example, the what we call reactive and preventative maintenance. There's work being done to make sure that the town is moving more to a preventative maintenance sort of strategy over the longer term to make sure that that managing those assets is a little bit more efficient, a little less costly, by ensuring that we're targeting preventative maintenance on those assets when they're needed, right? So quite a bit of the budget is related to reactive maintenance, which is normal for pretty much all municipalities, but the town is already looking into those types of things. I think I'll look to Rahul if I think that's a fair statement. Okay. Is there another question? So this number is from the town. This is the 10-year capital program based on the 24 budget. Yep. Our job is to make sure that 376.3 million, number one, covers the costs needed to meet the proposed level of service over the next 10 years and ensure or identify the funding needed in order to get there, and making sure that that funding is enough. If it's not enough, then we'll call that an infrastructure gap and report that infrastructure gap to council. We'll assess it in terms of the replacement values of those replacement values that you saw in the previous slide. So it's a combination of places. It's from a lot of the infrastructure that's reported in the 2024 asset management plan is fairly up to date. It's a good data set. What we've done is we took those costs and we brought them up to 2024 dollars using the non-residential construction price index. And with that, and the non-residential construction price index covers the majority of the assets in the portfolio, and it's a fair representation of that infrastructure in 24 dollars. Sure. And what the value are. And as a general perspective, some of them don't take all that much into place, but we do make sure that when we're looking at the town picture, we are looking at the classes and evaluation classes. Those valuations effectively tie directly to the funding that we're going to have help. So we have to look at the inputs to make sure that when we're looking at the financing costs that's required in the longer term, that there's some strategy. So we do, you already doing that?
They've always put in the budget, $400,000.
Do you put out tenders every year for our equipment and get multiple tenders back in terms of pricing? And we always go with the best priced option based on our needs. We understand that there are other municipalities that are using a very simple tractor, and that might work in their municipality for their needs. But based on the service level that we're hoping to provide and based on our community, what we're going with is what's best for us. But like I said, for equipment in specific, we go to tender. For a lot of our road work, we also go to tender. And we always try and choose the best price option for those. So that's where we're getting our numbers from. We're getting them from various consultants, various outside sources that are providing us with quotes. Yep. Yep. No, no, no. It's not regulated. It's definitely not regulated. I think we would see a decline in service if we were to change to a $50,000 piece of machinery. Mhm. Yep. And that's how we've been presenting budget. In terms of these pieces, we do explain to them that the budget that we've put forward is, one, it's an educated budget. We do get these quotes. And two, we explain to them as well that if that budget needs to be cut, that there is an impact to service. And that's exactly why we're doing this study as well.
So correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
When you are purchasing equipment.
Yep.
You have to take that proposed purchase to council for approval, and included in the report is why you chose that equipment and why that's the best one for the municipality. Is that correct?
If it's kind of two-tiered, so it depends on the value for that budget piece. Those items, so for example, all of fleet is broken down line by line in the budget, dollar for dollar. So if something were to come back to us and it's over budget, that absolutely has to go to council. But otherwise, they're all already included in the budget.
So they review the budget. They
Yep.
can speak to the specific equipment there.
Yep.
And then if they go over, then that's the check and balance.
Yep.
that they can open the discussion with staff as to why.
Yep. Yep. Mhm. 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 If that's what we needed to in order to make sure that we're providing the services to our residents in terms of sidewalk snow plowing, then absolutely. We put specs out, we get the tenders back, and we choose the best price based on those. I can say in our most recent sidewalk machine, we did get 2 quotes back. We went with the best price for that. It is lower than what originally was budgeted, so we did come in under budget for those. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so when we put the tender forward, we don't say it needs to be a trackless, we don't say it needs to be a specific brand. We say it needs this much horsepower, it needs to be able to spread salt, it needs to be able to plow a sidewalk. And we get quotes back and we go based off of that information. So. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, no, not a problem. It's on YouTube. Yep. Yes. Yeah.
And they are well worth the money. Because
Yeah.
they are used constantly.
Yeah.
And they are completely good. That is an asset.
Mhm.
To the actual operation.
Thank you. All right.
I have a question for him.
Yep.
It has to do with comparisons of peer like communities. And, is this type of information in any way measured against other similar like communities?
Depending on money, in what perspective.
And we look at it, obviously, as we look at design, it's obviously for the client, so they're the constructor, their position, their budget, it's unique that, it kind of, pinpoint, the position of the project that we work on. That being said, we do some check and analysis to make sure that when we're looking at evaluations, and we're looking at the condition protocols, I mean, what, if something stands out, if something's different, you know, why are evaluations here for affecting our own longer so high, so low. So we do some sort of overall check in that respect. And then we look at the budget side of things. I mean, again, that's, again, very unique to town, but we do look at the revenue side of it and we'll make sure that we're compliant with the existing approach in terms of funding the existing funding the act. If there's something that wasn't doing, I mean, it's not going to be a wiggle room in the municipal budget, but even one example, if there's a community that we didn't, we would say, hey, you know, why are they requiring to look at non-recurring funding of course their infrastructure? So there are those things to check them do, those evaluations.
There's a better thing is the best managed community. When asset management, that you both would see and you would measure their skill set, their needs versus what you're doing with other communities.
I mean, I can say just from the work that we do here so far, from what I see other communities, you're a bit more progressive on the asset management side of others in terms of the way you develop the budget, the way you have to plan that, the methodology is one of the condition parameters. So there's a lot of foresight here that's being done and probably a bit of a head of the curve in other teams. I mean, just from a very general context, but I mean, you look at the bigger state communities, smaller ones, everyone has their ups and downs with their own focus, right?
Are those questions that the town is asking?
Benchmark.
The benchmarking and motivating stuff.
I mean, they're asking us to make sure that that approach is and the methodology employed.
Any other question? Oh, sure. Yeah, yes. Sorry about that. So sorry, going on a couple slides left. We just wanted to kind of leave off with everyone here a sample of sort of the work that's being done and how this is being actually undertaken. What you see here is a sample of the current level of service measures, some of those measures, not all of them, that are being sort of tracked by the town. And the current level of service column represents what those measures are. Just as an example, for example, in the sample there for fleet, one example is the fleet downtime for repairs. So how much time on average is the fleet down for repairs? Sort of an ongoing maintenance requirement. The general, how much of the general maintenance schedule is followed, and the percentage of assets at or above good or very good condition. That's that bar that you saw a few sort of slides ago. For stormwater, as an example, is the percentage of properties resilient to a 100-year storm. And what you'll notice there in brackets, it says OREG 58817. This is one of the measures that's strictly required by the regulation to be tracked by the town. So the regulation does require the specific measures for the core services. So that'll be your storm, bridges, culverts, roads, water, and wastewater. So there are specific measures that the town must report on. For bridges and culverts, as an example, is the average condition index. And what the average condition index is, it's a number from 0 to 100 representing the condition of a bridge. And those numbers are based on independent engineering reports. And those are required to be done every 2 years as per provincial legislation. So that's based on an engineering assessment of the town's bridges and culverts. And sort of going down the list for the roads, the average pavement condition index for the roads and the average condition index for unpaved roads. Once again, based to the point made earlier, based on an engineering assessment that was done very recently. The question, yeah.
So the percentage of properties completed is 100 years square. So
infrastructure is resilient. The 100-year storm, just to give you a bit of background, the town did undertake a pretty detailed assessment of the properties that are in and outside sort of the flood area. So that number is fairly reliable in terms of the data that the town has undertaken, and it's based on that 100-year, based on sort of best practices in that sort of stormwater management of infrastructure field. Yep.
Conservation Authority, like working for 3 years. So I'm surprised that would be incorporated.
So we just recently received an update for our boundaries for the flood areas. So what we should also note is that the core infrastructure from the asset management plan was completed as a snapshot in 2021. So when we go to update, we'll look at those new flood boundaries, and they have been pushed out. So we'll take a look at those at that point. This is just a small snapshot of some of the levels of service that we speak to in the asset management plan. Yeah.
So moving on to the actual process. So like we mentioned there, the current level of service is sort of recorded through that 2024 asset management plan. The next step in the process, like I mentioned, is really coming up with those proposed levels of service. And we want to identify those targets over the next sort of 10-year period. And as we saw in some of the previous slide, in terms of the process, consultation with staff, in consultation with the public, and as well as council, and as well as our assessment on those proposed level of service, we're going to come up with sort of what those targets are going forward. Now, the targets are sort of meaningless without the information to back it up. And that's really the life cycle activities and cost portion. For each of those levels of service, we want to make sure that we understand what the life cycle activities are needed in order to meet those level of service objectives. So when I say life cycle activities in the asset management world, I mean things like, do we need to repair an asset? Do we need to replace an asset? Is there an option to repair it? Is there an option for an alternative asset to be able to provide that service? Each of those activities has a cost associated to it. And like we saw in the capital budget, those are the costs related to those level of service objectives. We want to make sure we understand that the costs to meet that target are recorded as part of the exercise. And to sort of the point earlier, making sure that that capital program captures those costs over the longer term period. We want to assess in terms of the financing strategy portion that the regulation also requires. We want to make sure we assess the tax rate impact of meeting those proposed levels of service, or the water and wastewater rate impact. If there is an impact, if we are short, then there is a gap that's identified through that plan. If we're not short, then there wouldn't be an impact. But that's sort of the end result of this exercise, understanding what that long-term impact is going to be. And finally, we want to identify any risks associated of not meeting that service. So just good asset management practice is making sure we know what could go wrong if we don't meet those objectives. We want to make sure we understand what those risks are. So needless to say, we've had some very good conversation here and some very excellent points that were made on sort of what we showed today. So the town does want to hear from residents in order to be able to sort of get the feedback as part of this process that could be important for us to identify something that perhaps hasn't been looked at and something that's of concern to residents. So the town wants to hear from you, and what the town is undertaking is this public process. The town has launched a project page to provide updates on this process going forward. It's available at engage.saugeenshores.ca/LOS. And any information that's coming out of this process is going to sort of be posted through that website. One important component here is that the town has developed a survey as well, a survey of questions that are related to the asset management and the level of service component, particularly focused on sort of those condition of assets. And we want folks to kind of go through the survey, kind of answer it, and that'll give us some additional feedback that we can take back in order to help inform that level of service sort of exercise there. So, that said, we wanted to kind of leave you off with a bit of some questions to kind of think about. By no means do you need to answer these questions. This is just something to get the conversation going, and we already had quite a bit of good discussion today. Thinking about the infrastructure assets, we want to make sure, is there anything of concern to you? We heard a few points today that we will be taking back in order to be able to think about that a little further. Are there any service areas that are of concern to you that we should be thinking about a little more or a little differently from your perspective? We got some comments on, the conditions. Do you agree or disagree that the town's assets are generally in that good to very good condition range? And as well, do you think that there's enough spending being done in order to keep those assets in good condition, or alternatively, is there too much spending? And that's perfectly fine. And those are the things that we want to hear from folks as part of the survey and as a part of this process, and we'll take that back and sort of think about that a little further. Question? It's going to be available on the Engage website. I got that.
Yeah. It is available on the Engage site. There's also QR codes posted around the room if you want to do it through that way, but it's not through Flash Vote. Yep.
Same with regards to the development of the asset management strategy and plan for the future. There's all the background work that's required, as you're saying, going, what is the condition of the road, all that. But then it's the record keeping, so that it's great to pull up, and then,
Yep.
you have your GIS person here, which is wonderful.
Yeah,
But
she's
it's
very
like, oh, sorry. That's, so, what are those other kinds of tools that you're developing in your toolbox, so that as you move forward, this becomes a proactive rather than reactive, and let's stop and let's check everything out strategy.
I can definitely talk about that. So part of the asset management group is the GIS. It's very focused. It's a great database tool. It's a great tool to hold all of that information about cost and condition and all the various studies that we do. So we're very heavy into the GIS as our data repository. We're now working on improving how that gets pushed out and disseminated to other groups for decision-making processes. So we do have a number of different softwares that we use internally in order to be able to pull these numbers very quickly and make decisions, and to be able to house all of the condition information that we're getting from the various studies that every department's doing at this point.
And is it symbiotic with information that the county has, so that the GIS can be used together?
Yep.
And it's the whole area.
Yeah, so actually, our GIS license is through the county. We have a GIS steering committee through Bruce County. We meet quarterly to discuss all things GIS, and we work very closely with them. We also now have a Bruce Gray asset management steering committee, so we meet with other municipalities and discuss things all asset management as well.
There's been a lot of discussion, there's been discussion over time regarding the tree canopy. I don't see anything here that is touching that.
Yep. So the tree canopy study, because it's still ongoing, isn't included in our asset management plan. We do currently keep an inventory in our GIS of all of our trees along municipal corridors that is updated regularly by our arborist. So we do have a strong database for that. But we're waiting for that study to be completed, especially so that we can put more of a dollar value and a condition assessment in place for that. So it's actually quite detailed. So a few years ago, my understanding is we did a data collection for all of our trees along the municipal corridors. It includes tree type, width at breast height, I think. If there's been any issues in terms of ash borer, if it's been any limbs have been cut down or anything like that, it's all tracked in it. So it's a pretty intensive database at this point. I don't think they're flagged, like they're definitely not flagged as significant, but I would assume the ones that are much larger would be those ones. Yeah, and I think the tree canopy plan, they've worked closely with our arborists as well to make sure that that data kind of comes together as one big piece. So, yeah,
That's more of a.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Bye.
our assets right now. I think that there was talk about it or talk with working with, I believe it's Gray County has. Yeah, yeah, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, we'll make a note of that for sure. Yeah.
I want to mention one of my pet complaints is physical condition of some of our tree culverts. Okay?
Yeah.
There's some pretty ugly tree culverts out there that are not. And they've been bad for years and deteriorating more. Yet, there's 2 or 3 of them. that are beautiful.
Yeah. Yes, we have, if you just have a look on our 10-year plan, actually plan for replacement of 2 culverts in the next 5 years. And then also will be repaired. We just did repairs on 2 bridges this year. We also have cash for repair of some of them.
So hopefully you won't forget those poor people that live north of the river.
Oh,
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Yeah.
Kind of make a point. I had a rush over here because today was the day that I paid my 4th installment of my property tax.
Yeah.
And yes, we had great growth, massive growth here. And I didn't, this is August, 30 years of work, and I had the pleasure of having days over there.
Mhm.
And we saw growth paying for an awful lot of the increased costs.
Mhm.
And we saw tax bills not increasing anywhere near procedure here.
Mhm.
Because that's sort of in the back of my mind, and I know we're going to budgeting now. Whether my $7,000 tax bill this year will be $8,000 next year, I don't know.
Mhm.
At some point, start thinking, why does this volume, why does this volume increase? Give us the productivity improvements. Amazing.
Mhm.
So that's a great question. I mean, there's obviously differences between Saugeen Shores and Mississauga, and obviously right, and there's the biggest thing you'll see is growth, and obviously development charges are going to pay for the expansion related activities associated with it, and growth to some degree there's the capital cost, but then there's increased operating costs associated with the growth that comes with it, but there's just economies of scale associated with. So you do need quite a bit of growth to start seeing that economies of scale to offset some of those, operational increases that you're seeing. So there's that tug of war as growth's happening, you're upfronting the cost, and there's a municipality that's trying to expand the infrastructure associated with it, which granted it might be paid for by DCs, but there's still obviously the municipal backing to fund all the operational costs until the growth catches up into it. So,
Is it going?
yeah,
Citation, asset.
that's right. Right.
Good point.
The mobile. Sorry, the equipment.
We own all of our fleet and equipment. Yep. Yep. Yeah, anything that's been reported in the asset management plan is owned by the municipality. Mhm.
So as part of this exercise, we're looking at levels of service specifically to the infrastructure assets. So not necessarily services such as, for example, the provision of services at your rec center, or things like that. We're looking at levels of service to track specific characteristics of the infrastructure itself. So like we saw, one of the big ones is the actual condition of those assets, the actual sort of operational components of them. For example, when are those inspections taking place? How many of them are taking place? So it's very specific to the infrastructure itself as opposed to the service, to the direct services to the residents. That would be one of the categories, yes. The condition of those sidewalks, yes. Not the service itself. So the condition would be the level of service specific to the characteristics of the infrastructure itself, as opposed, yeah, and even as opposed to saying, as opposed to looking at operational type levels of service, like, how much kind of recreation time programs, things like that. Yeah. Sorry. That's not, is that one measure? I don't think, we don't have that as a measure on the asset management front, but that is something that Public Works would track. Yes. Yep. Any other questions, comments? Yes. Yes. And there's a catch-all question, I believe. Yeah, there's a catch-all question where you can comments other that you can add. Yeah.
Projects throughout the community that become joint projects in municipality, province, and town. Going through that whole big intersection rebuild involved